Hi guys, welcome to CROWMENTARY. My name is Wen.
I'm Dana, and we are PCSE.
Okay, so recently I watched a cutscene from Sex Education, like a very famous series about sex education. And in that scene, the main character is a girl, like a high school student called Amy. And she was traveling on a bus, probably to school. And on that bus, she was kind of approached by a complete stranger male. And what he's trying to do is that he trying to approach her and then trying to masturbate when looking at her. And he even come on her trousers. So the girl was definitely very traumatized and she acted really scared. And I feel like that was such a disturbing scene. And unfortunately, that might not be an isolated case.
I absolutely agree. Well, I can definitely relate to the scene that you have just described on a very personal level, because, as you've said, it's not an isolated situation. Um, so for me, this is just a personal sharing, and I am only able to really share this because I have moved on. So this occurred when I was in high school, obviously a minor, and it was during winter. So I was standing at a bus station, and because it was kind of cold, you could expect what I was wearing. I was wearing literally pitch black, long trousers, dark jacket on the outside, and I even had a scarf. But suddenly, an absolute male stranger riding a motorcycle tried to come close to me, and he revealed literally his dick at a minor girl. And he just kept looking at me while masturbating. And I don't think he was even fucking sober. I don't think it... Anyway, I don't think that kind of person deserves any bit of respect from me or anyone. So, uh, obviously, as a high school girl, at that moment, I was so freaked out and I didn't know how I should react. All I could do was like try to look away and just kept hoping in my head, where's the bus? How long do I still have to wait here and be in this terrible situation? And I don't think I was able to talk about this for like at least 1 or 2 years following.
Well, to be honest, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. Like, like on a personal level, that really, I believe it really traumatized you and like anyone who have experienced it.
Yeah, like as I said, I have moved on, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I have forgot. I definitely do not forget what I came across at the time. And the sad thing is, it was not the only case that I was like sexually harassed like that. There were at least two other times where male tried to like approach me in a sexual way without my consent or a bit of consideration. And the even sadder thing is that I don't think I'm the only one. I am absolutely am not the only one. And there are a lot of girls out there, not even girls, anybody out there, uh, were or could be victims of these non consensual activities. So this leads to a whole question about consent.
Mm.
So a lot of people may say that he did not physically touch you in any way, you didn't have penetrative intercourse. How can you say that it's sexually harassed? Like you were sexually harassed?
Mm.
like what do you think about this notion?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it's quite popular. I think many people would say that in a case of like sexual assault or rape or anything like that, any kind of violations where the victims come up and like speak up, they were faced with doubts and questions like, if you guys have not done it all the way, then might it not be considered, rape and like assault? And that's like the common misconception of like what assault is and what sex really is. In like the case of Amy and like in the case of your situation, those people definitely have conducted some kind of sexual activities, definitely, right? But they like, and you and Amy were the target, and that in itself is enough for it to be sexual harassment because you guys did not consent to it. While we're not trying to invalidate situations where victims have been raped penetratively, but it's important to acknowledge that there's a wide range of activities, not just physical, that could be considered sexual.
Yeah. Can you give me like some examples?
Yeah. So I think one of the more popular example I can think of right now is how the online space have kind of transformed what we think is
Yeah.
sexual, right? So before the online digital world become more prevalent, people usually have sexual activities in person. So they have to be like physical or direct.
Yeah.
But now the online world conveyed a lot kind of messages, a lot of kind of data. So images, video calls, yeah. Our communications have been made much more easier, and that also includes sexual activities. Even I know that a lot of couples trying to kind of rekindle their sexuality by, if they're living far away from each other, like geographically, they can video call each other and dirty talk or something like that. Definitely very effective, but it also creates more space for bad things to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily think that these online formats of doing sexual activities are bad. They can be ways for you to enhance your sexual life and enjoyment with your partner. And in itself, it's not something bad. It's the way that we could possibly utilize it for personal purposes. There was another series, also on Netflix, that I just watched rather recently. Um, there was this girl, the main female lead. She was having a relationship with a guy, with her boyfriend, and her boyfriend kind of like urged her to like, please film your a nude video of yourself and send it to me because I want like I want to look at your picture, look at your body and feel how sexy it is. And of course, she gave consent. She gave consent and she filmed herself doing you know she filmed herself stripping off her clothes and doing all these very sexy moves. What she didn't give consent to was that her boyfriend spreaded this video on the school platform without her absolutely knowing anything about it. And the bad thing is, the very unfortunate thing is that friends at her school did not try to comfort her, did not try to understand her from her point of view. They all looked at her and see her as like a slut. And this is extremely very unfortunate and it shouldn't be happening. So I think it's like a representative example of what you have just said. Do you have anything to add on?
Well, yeah, that case is definitely very disturbing because I guess the boy in question, the
Yeah.
boyfriend, has no consideration whatsoever for her actual consent and her scope of consent. And he just kind of like performatively asked for consent. But yeah, that counts as nothing. Like she consented to him using the image for, their relationship and not for spreading it for, his use. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Besides from all the things that we have just mentioned about sexual activities, there's one thing that I would like to add on, which is verbal. verbal activities. We have a very popular term, I think you probably know, catcalling.
Yes.
It's like some very, very physically attractive person walking by the street, and some absolute stranger. It's like, hey, what a sexy body. And talking all of these very sexual verbal statements towards the person. Obviously, without them feeling comfortable. And it could even lead to this mental trauma. And it's just very sad that it's quite common. And a lot of people just don't see the problems within it. It's like, I'm complimenting you. But this is obviously, I think, a sexual activity that requires consent.
Yeah. Because like in the situation of specifically catcalling, right? The way that people think of catcalling, catcalling is not compliment, right? Compliment is like genuinely complimenting someone on their appearance or any other aspect with a respectful tone. But catcalling does not have an element of respect or any element of like asking for consent.
It's like objectification.
Yes. So yeah, when you're catcalling, you're trying to seeing the other person as the object that should be praised for the values of the object and not a human being. So
Yeah.
that's really disturbing.
Okay, I agree. So throughout the whole conversations that we have just had, the term that we kept using is consent. So do you have any take on this consent term?
Well, I think it's nice to kind of see how the general society is looking at consent. I think when we ask just a random person what they think consent is, then probably the common answer would be consent is voluntary, is a permission for somebody to do something on the conditions that all parties involved are, of course, voluntary. They are informed of all the risk and benefits of the situation. They know what they're getting into, and mutual because all the parties know that they are part of this, and they're aware of the impacts that could be happening on them. That could generally be a nice definition for consent because it's really easy to approach, and that's I think is the kind of the beauty of that condensation. But I think it's nice to look at some other nuances that this definition can bring. So, do you think there are certain cases where all those values, all the qualities that we've just mentioned, voluntary, informed, mutuals, may not be enough?
Yes, absolutely. Well, from my perspective, I think a lot of people nowadays, probably especially Gen Z, like us, can be more aware of certain factors that can contribute that can result in the consent being not valid. For example, like intoxication or maybe deception. So all of these terms, I think these, like for example, you've just said a lot of people describe consent as something valid when both parties or all parties involved are informed. In case of intoxication, they are informed. They are asked about it. About voluntary, they say yes, they give consent while being intoxicated. They mutually agree with sex. While being intoxicated, they do feel this sexual urge. Require, they need to release this sexual urge at the time. But would people, while being intoxicated, really are capable of giving consent? It's a whole different story. So I think just the other day before, when I talked to you and you kind of give me like a brief outline of the historical development of consent theory. Can you help me like articulate all of it like one more time?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the expert to do that, but I do find like a short information section in a book called Sexual Consent by Milena Popova. And in that section, she kind of go through chronologically the development of how society view consent. So I think in the early radical feminist movement, there's this recognition that women and men are not on a level playing field when it comes to negotiate consent, because they start to realize that women have, with a kind of social status that they have, which is often lower than men, both in the world of like labor force and in the domestic environment, they were kind of indoctrinated in believing that their purpose was to serve the family, was to be the support of the breadwinner, and that they had to serve their husbands or boyfriends in a sexual way. So, because that's the kind of the whole system set up against women for the benefit of men, it makes women more coerced into serving men's sexual desires. And as two different agents of society, men and women suffer a lot of like disadvantage when it comes to giving consent and actually understand what their consent is. So yeah, they start to recognize this problem, and they look into the social structures that set this problem and trying to seek a solution.
So I can understand from your sharing that this no means no notion kind of centers around the idea that the disadvantaged group usually has the right to deny and refuse to involve in sexual activities with other parties, but they are usually neglected. Yeah, is that correct?
Yes. So when they say explicitly no, or like trying to express that they don't want it, they are not listened to, and violations still happened. But you know, there are critiques for this kind of no means no movement. It's that no means no center around a lot on saying the no. So if somebody not explicitly say no, that like in the gray area, there's a fine line between really wanting it or kind of like not understanding whether they want it or not. It's kind of very blurry, and they're not exactly sure. And for many groups, this could be like they're totally conscious of their decision, but they're not sure. And many in those situations, they have not good experience when it comes to like the actual activities.
So, for example, someone asked me to have intercourse with them, and I'm just like, I'm not sure if I want it or not, but I mean, sure,
Yeah.
why not? And I guess during the whole experience, it felt like it could feel good, or it could feel like so and so,
Yeah.
or it could feel actually bad.
Yeah.
Like a scenario kind of like that, right? I obviously gave my consent. I didn't say no, and I guess I'm not sure if I say no, how would the other party kind of would react. But yeah, essentially, there are situations where a party may not be fully aware or conscious of their own desire, but they're like kind of urged into having sex.
Yeah. Well, this happens a lot with like couples and dating, because it's a norm for couples and even husbands and wife to have sex, right? But it creates the kind of norms that one party only needs the other not to say no to I will not say commit, but like do the action, while in fact not say no is not the permission to voluntarily like actively trying to involve themselves into the situation. So people definitely recognize this, and in later phase they shift no means no into yes means yes. So basically the absence of a no now turns into the presence of a yes, and only in that situation is consent given. So yeah, that's basically like the development of no's mean no's and yes mean yes.
What I find interesting about this yes means yes notion is that if it like emphasizes on the yes, it means that I have both parties, even the so-called disadvantaged group, have this kind of equal value, equal say in the relationship, that they actively want to do the sex activity. They want to do the intercourse. They want to enjoy themselves. Okay, so the question is, because I recently read another book. It's kind of an old book, from Alan Wertheimer in 2003. He argued the notion of no means no, and he kind of discussed in his book about not yes means yes. It's about whether, if yes really means yes. So the book kind of went really deep into discussing when, how, in what shape can consent be valid. So I think that it kind of like talks about, can be said as like a limitation of the yes means yes notion that you just described, because this movement kind of like really focused on the sex positive experience of all parties directly involved. But yes, not necessarily always means they are able to say this yes.
Well, yeah, I agree. Like, that's a very interesting take because yes means yes and no means no both hinge on the notion that the person giving the consent, yes or no, first of all, it's so simple. Like, it's just a yes or it's just a no.
Yeah.
Right? It's a dichotomy where people could just pick one out of the two.
Yeah.
And second is that the assumption is that the person giving consent is always in their good frame of mind or in a state where they can make good decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, either in like a temporary state where they're sober or
Yeah, it's like the whole those notions were like they probably kind of oversimplified the social factors or like external factors affecting the parties involved in that moment.
yeah. So, well, for example, in the cases where because I think you and I both heard the word sexual script.
Yeah.
Right? So sexual script is basically something, because it's a script, right? We look at it and we knows what's going to happen next. And the sexual script for our society changes over time based on, the prevalent notions of the contemporary era. But basically what it means is that there's a popular notions of what sex involves. And as long as people act according to the normative, series of actions, it will lead to a confirmed ends. So, for example, people go on dates and they give each other nice gifts and dress in a nice way. That's a very common trope of like, people go on dating and then
Yeah.
go home to have sex.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I mean, I've seen a lot of movies
Yeah.
that have that kind of scenes, and it's always that the boyfriend in a heterosexual relationship, obviously, the man would like try to buy flowers, prepare a beautiful, nice dinner, and he would expect the girl to dress up beautifully, have her makeup perfect, and ready for this romantic dinner. And I guess in this scenario, for some reason, it always ends up with sex. And I do think it has certain influences on us as viewers. And if this occurs over than like not only one time, it occurs like in way too many movies, and not even movies, in any sort of media production and content that we have consumed. It kind of reinforces this idea of having sex and consenting to sex within our mind. So obviously this is like a social factor that may not directly affect our decision to give consent, but over time it does affect. It does have very like very huge impact on our ability to give decision.
Mm.
So, yeah, going back to our previously discussed um, the from we could see that even though the yes means yes movement has has had certain improvements compared to the no means no notion, but there could still be limitations.
Yeah.
There were definitely limitations, like intoxication, social urges, social influences, even deception or coercion, etc. So I think that this is where I believe that Alan Wertheimer like really tried to like debate and discuss within his book, and I believe it kind of aligns with, I guess, from what I remember from our previous discussion the other day, the last phase of, not exactly the last, but the most recent phase of consent theory that you just mentioned.
Yeah. So the sex critical approaches, right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
the one.
Yeah, so basically it's a range of approaches, like we've mentioned, that kind of tackles the issue of like cultural influence, social influence, and of course individual involvement in making decision. So it's more, I think it could be considered comprehensive because it looks at more angles and aspects. And also it looks at the kind of notions that people have preconceived based on the kind of media, the culture that they're in, and how that's going to affect the way that they see consent, give consent, and also how to receive, consent in the right way or react to consent or non-consent situation.
Okay.
Well,
So I believe that at least with the so I believe that with the most recently developed theory on consent, we have started to take into account all the factors that may contribute or may affect our decision to make consent. Not only the short term, but also the long term, the tangible, the intangible.
so when we're talking about like sexual script that society generated have, I found like something really interesting is that like from our observation, a normal script has many actions, right? Because there are a lot of scenes in a script. So in that scenes, usually they would start by, you know, talking to each other and then start touching and then start to go more intimate and then they have sex. So because they frame the ultimate having sex, usually penetrative heterosexual sex, as the peak, like the final thing of the whole script, then all the actions before, all the scenes are, you know, series leading up to the final action. And it
Okay.
makes people think that those behaviors are expressions of consent.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
So with all these scripts, generally, the final point, the final destination is
Yeah.
always sex.
Yes.
And if sex does not occur, it means that all the previous scenes would be kind of meaningless. It
Yeah.
shouldn't like be occurring, right? And all of those scenes only uh, all of those scenes only take place for the purpose of having the sex scene
Yeah.
at the end.
Yeah. And also, like, all of those activities, even though it looks so natural and like so smooth flowing, it still are behaviors that require consent. But some people, they would think that because the ultimate goal is to have sex anyway, and she seems or he seems like they would be enjoying sex with me tonight, all of the previous actions, I don't need to ask for consent. And that's like quite problematic.
So these people, they kind of perceive in their mind that all of these behavior and actions equal the expression of consent. And that is just not comprehensive. That is just not sufficient.
Yeah.
And sometimes it could lead to very wrongful results.
Yeah.
So that being said, there are still nuances where there are actually couples, planning very great dates and they actually both want to have sex, and it's
Yeah.
very normal. So yeah, I think that we have a lot to discuss about this topic even further, but I guess we should kind of wrap it up here for this
Yeah.
first episode. Do you have like any other things that you would like to share?
Well, yeah, of course, this is a very complicated problem because, to be honest, unluckily, in many society or many communities, asking for consent is being considered awkward and like
Yeah.
mood, trying to move a mood.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of people would approach consent in a very like reserved way because they don't want to be seen as meek, you know? They want to be seen as being strong and like in control of the situation and they want everything to go smoothly, like the script.
Yeah.
Yeah, so well, if we have to explain consent to probably our younger audience, then what would you say is the most important thing that you have to know about consent?
Well, for me, I think this is like very important, not only for the men, also the women, or like anyone out there. That because we have usually both sides involved, could be more, could be less. We should understand that, first of all, we need to respect consent. But respecting consent may not be as easy as it sounds. We need to be able to validate these certain factors that could affect the other party's decision to give this consent. Like intoxicated, the person is drunk, she says yes, but she didn't feel very comfortable with it, etc., etc. The second thing is that the other party, while being respected, they should also be aware that they have the right to give consent. They have the right to give their voice in this relationship, and they have the right to communicate it and to request respect. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, it's all about like clear communication and respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing embarrassing about it. There's nothing
Obviously, yeah.
awkward. Yeah. Okay, so that wraps up our conversation. I think it has been such a meaningful discussion to have with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. Me personally, I learned a lot and explored a lot, and I hope the same goes for the audience. So I guess see you next time.
See ya.